For years, I worked hard and made sure our biggest account stayed happy, but when I finally asked for a raise, they acted like it was a joke. That moment flipped a switch. I walked out without giving a notice. The next morning. For years, I showed up early, fixed other people's messes, and made sure our biggest account stayed happy. But when I finally asked for a raise, they acted like it was a joke. That moment flipped the switch. I walked out without giving notice, and the next morning, everything changed. Hello. Thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Johnson Veltman from Ohio. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. For years, I told myself it would all even out in the end. That if I just kept showing up, kept my head down, and did the work nobody else wanted to touch, someone would eventually notice. Not the surface level appreciation, that you're a lifesaver of Slack messages or the lukewarm applause in staff meetings, but real recognition. The kind that showed up on paper. The kind that shifted numbers on a paycheck. But months turned into years, and the more I gave, the more invisible I became. People got promoted off my ideas, took credit for my cleanup jobs, and smiled while doing it. I started wondering if maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I wasn't doing as much as I thought. Maybe I really was just support staff. That kind of gaslighting. Quiet, collective, and unspoken, it sinks in like mold. You breathe it for so long, you stop noticing the smell. I wasn't flashy. Never have been. I wasn't the one staying out late at networking mixers or charming clients with fake laughter over priced cocktails. I was the one fixing typos at midnight because someone didn't proofread. I was the one catching a missed compliance deadline with 48 hours to spare. I was the one who called a client on Christmas Eve just to walk them through an emergency restructure when my own family had barely seen me all day. That's who I was? The reliable one. The helper. I didn't mind. At first, I thought being indispensable meant being safe. That if I made myself useful enough, I couldn't be ignored. I didn't want fame. I wanted fairness. But in that office, usefulness was just a leash. The more you did, the tighter they pulled. There were signs, of course. Times I should have said something. Times I almost did. Like when I found out the junior analyst I trained was making $6,000 more than me, even though she worked 30% fewer hours and still had to be reminded to mute herself on client calls. Or when I stayed up until 3 a.m. fixing a slide deck for a meeting I wasn't invited to. Or when I overheard David, my own manager, telling a visiting partner that the team had salvaged the Alaris account after a near walkout. I was the team. There wasn't anyone else, but I just smiled, told myself it was politics, told myself it wasn't personal, told myself I was being dramatic. That's the thing about slow burn betrayal. You learn to breathe smoke before you realize you're choking. The tipping point wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even planned. It started with a spreadsheet. The monthly revenue tracker sent out like clockwork, color-coded in that smug, performative way HR loved. Revenue was up. The Alaris account had exceeded Q1 projections. Bonuses had been issued. And my name, again, wasn't on the list. Not even a line item. Not even a footnote. I stared at that screen for 10 minutes before I moved. I could feel my pulse in my teeth. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about what that omission said. You don't matter. Not enough to compensate. Not enough to reward. Not enough to name. I scheduled a meeting that afternoon. Just 15 minutes with David and Kelsey, the VP of Ops. Nothing major. I didn't rehearse some grand speech. I wasn't looking to cause trouble. I just wanted a conversation. I wore the blazer I saved for important moments. Charcoal gray. Structured shoulders. A reminder to myself that I was serious. I came with numbers, documented results, a list of expanded responsibilities. I spoke calmly, clearly. No emotion, no accusation. Given the scope of work I've been managing, especially over the past year, I'd like to revisit my compensation. David looked at Kelsey. Kelsey looked at David. Then she smiled, not kindly. It was the kind of smile people wear when they've already made up their minds. Then she said it, the sentence that would split something open inside me forever. Let's be realistic. She laughed a little when she said it. Like I just asked for a corner office or demanded a company car. David didn't even try to hide the smirk. They didn't offer feedback. They didn't ask for time to think. They didn't even pretend to consider it. Just a dismissal wrapped in politeness and the unspoken message behind it. You should be grateful we even listened. I felt it hit me like a slap, but not one that made you cry. The kind that makes you go still, makes your skin go cold. I think that's when I stopped breathing. Not literally, but something in me shut down. Something deep and old. The part that believed in fairness. The part that thought loyalty meant something. I stood up without another word. I think they expected me to protest, maybe try to renegotiate, maybe cry. I didn't. I straightened my blazer, pushed in the chair, and said, "Thanks for your time." Then I walked out. Not just out of the meeting, out of the building, out of the job. No notice, no plan. Just a decision, sharp, sudden, irreversible. My phone buzzed in my pocket before I even hit the street. I didn't look. I didn't stop. I walked 2 blocks without knowing where I was going. Somewhere behind me, I imagined Slack threads lighting up, inboxes pinging, people whispering. Did she really just walk out? Is she okay? What happened? They could speculate all they wanted. They could write me off as emotional, unstable, difficult, but they would never say what really happened. They would never admit they laughed. They would never admit they broke something that day. Because if they did, they'd have to admit I mattered, and they never thought I did until I was gone. I didn't pack a single thing. Not the backup hard drive I kept tucked behind my monitor. Not the framed photo from that retreat in Santa Barbara where I'd stayed sober to drive everyone home. Not even the mug I'd bought during my first month. Matte black, simple, with a chipped handle I'd grown fond of. I just walked. I didn't wait for the elevator. I took the stairs. Every step felt like shedding a layer of skin. My ID badge bounced uselessly against my hip, still clipped to my waistband. That felt symbolic, like I was carrying their access even as I left it behind. I didn't cry in the Uber. I thought I might, thought the adrenaline would crash and leave me in a heap of regret and confusion, but it didn't. I sat with my hands flat on my thighs, breathing through the numbness that had crept into my limbs. The driver didn't speak, just glanced at me once in the mirror, then adjusted the radio to something soft and wordless. I was grateful for that. My phone buzzed 5 times between 5th Avenue and my street. Slack messages, emails, 2 missed calls. I didn't look. I stared out the window like I was watching someone else's life pass by. When I got inside, I kicked off my shoes and just stood there in the middle of the living room, coat still on. The silence felt like judgment at first, like the walls were asking what the hell I'd just done, but slowly it started to shift. It began to feel like peace, like something sacred. I walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sat at the table like I was waiting for an answer to arrive. But there wasn't one, just me. And the echo of her voice, "Let's be realistic," looping in my mind like an old voicemail I couldn't delete. It was around 8 that evening when the fear started to flicker. Not full-blown panic, not yet, just the subtle ache of uncertainty. The questions rolled in like a slow tide. What if they blacklisted me? What if I couldn't get another job? What if I had overestimated my value? What if I had just made the dumbest, most impulsive decision of my life? I gripped the edge of the table and tried to breathe through it, but it was like trying to meditate while standing in traffic. My thoughts wouldn't quiet. They just circled and snapped like dogs off leash. Then I thought of Elena Daniels. I opened my phone and found her number without thinking. She was the one person I trusted outside those walls. She was the reason the Alaris account stayed. The reason I stayed. We built that relationship over late-night deck rewrites and phone calls during crises no one else wanted to touch. I'd never asked her for anything beyond scheduling. Never made it personal. But now, for the first time in years, I needed someone to see me as more than a resource. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy for leaving a place that expected me to stay chained for crumbs. I stared at her contact photo for a full minute before I hit call. My hands were trembling. I felt 12 years old again, dialing the landline after my parents' worst fights, needing someone to tell me the world was still turning. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was warm, casual, and completely unprepared for what was coming. "Hey stranger," she said. "Everything okay?" "No," I replied. "I quit today." There was a pause. Not the kind you fill with politeness. The kind that signals understanding before it's even spoken. "You quit," she said slowly, like she was replaying my sentence in her head, searching for a missing word. "Did something happen?" I laughed. One sharp exhale. Years of small things finally stacked high enough to crush me. She didn't say anything for a moment, and I appreciated that. Some people rush to comfort too quickly. Elena let the silence stretch long enough to show respect. Then, finally, she said what I didn't know I needed to hear. "I'm not surprised. I've been waiting for you to walk." I blinked hard. "What? You've been holding that place together with duct tape and spit. I don't know how you lasted as long as you did. Honestly, I was starting to worry it would eat you alive." I don't remember crying, but I felt the tightness break in my throat like ice cracking under a boot. She wasn't coddling me. She wasn't pitying me. She was naming it. The invisible labor, the sacrifice, the erosion of self. She saw it all, and she hadn't even worked there. "I'm not calling to pitch you," I said quietly. "I just needed to tell someone who would understand." "I do," she said. "And I'll tell you this. If you're building something, anything, I want to be part of it. I don't care what it looks like." If it's got your fingerprints on it, I trust it. That was when I knew. Not hoped, not wished, knew. I wasn't lost. I wasn't flailing. I was free. For the first time in years, I wasn't operating under someone else's limitations. I could build something that reflected who I actually was, not just who they told me to be. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and outlined the skeleton of a company. I didn't even name it yet. That would come later. I just mapped out what I knew. Executive communications, strategic crisis handling, internal restructuring. All the things I'd done in secret under their name now finally under mine. At 8:17 the next morning, a message lit up my phone. Elena Daniels. Got time for coffee today? I'm downtown. Bring whatever you've got. I'm ready when you are. I read it twice. Then I read it again. I wrote back. Come to me. 9 a.m. kitchen table. I brushed my hair, changed into a soft navy sweater, and made coffee with my hands still slightly shaking. But it wasn't fear anymore. It was momentum. It was that dangerous, glorious moment when a woman stops apologizing and starts designing her own life. And in that moment, I realized something vital. They thought I needed them, but it turns out I was the gravity they mistook for scenery. Elena showed up at 8:56 sharp, holding a cardboard tray with 2 lattes and that tight, calculating glint in her eyes that only came out when she smelled opportunity. Not desperation, opportunity. She didn't hug me, didn't ask how I was feeling. She just slid the coffee toward me across the table and said, "Tell me what you've got." That was the moment I knew she was serious. This wasn't a curtsy call. She wasn't here out of pity. She had aligned herself with something she trusted, and that something was me. I hadn't even named the company yet, but in her mind, it already existed. I walked her through the draft. I pulled together service tiers, industry focus, value differentiation. I didn't pitch it with any flair. Just facts, quiet confidence, the way I'd always spoken in meetings until someone louder repeated me and got credit. Elena listened, nodding slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. She asked questions, smart ones, the kind that revealed gaps I hadn't considered yet, but there was no skepticism in her tone, just engagement. I could tell she was already imagining how to sell it to her own board. That was the difference between her and them. They waited for permission to see value. She just saw it. They're going to try to spin this, she said eventually, leaning back in the chair I usually reserved for guests I liked. You know that, right? They already have, I replied. My inbox was full before I even got home. She tilted her head. Any threats? No. Just condescension. They think I'll regret it. She smiled. Not kindly. They're terrified. I hadn't thought of it that way. I'd been so focused on my own fear. The late-night spirals, the budget spreadsheets, the haunting question of whether I'd burned a bridge I couldn't rebuild, that I hadn't stopped to consider how it looked from the other side. The quiet one walks out and suddenly the foundation shifts. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of realizing how much they'd already lost and how blind they'd been to it. Later that day, I turned my phone back on and let myself scroll through the messages. Kelsey's tone had evolved from dismissive to diplomatic. We were caught off guard. Can we chat? David had written, no hard feelings. Let's connect soon. I'd love to give you a strong referral. A few others from the team I'd trained sent vague, nervous texts. Nobody asked why I left. They already knew. They just didn't want it on record. By Thursday, I had 3 meetings booked with potential vendors and 2 intro calls with other small businesses who had heard, somehow, that I was starting something. Word traveled fast in our industry. I didn't even have a website yet. Just a concept and a one-pager with no branding. But people were reaching out, not because of marketing, because they remembered how I made them feel when things went wrong. Calm, capable, human. The old company had never grasped that. They saw deliverables and hours built. They didn't understand that trust was the real currency. The part that hit hardest wasn't the silence from leadership. It was the silence from the people I'd helped most. The ones I'd stayed late for, covered shifts for, coached through breakdowns. I'd spent years believing we were some kind of family, dysfunctional but bonded. But when I walked, they stayed quiet. Not even a good luck. That was the moment I finally understood what I had been to them. Convenient, useful, a buffer, not a peer, not a friend, and definitely not someone worth sticking their necks out for. I started unpacking the memories with a new kind of clarity. Like how David used to forward his entire inbox to me every Friday and say, filter out what matters. Or the time Kelsey made me rewrite an entire presentation at midnight because she didn't like the font. The way they'd schedule client calls during my PTO and then act surprised when I logged in anyway. I thought I was earning loyalty. What I was really doing was teaching them how little they had to offer in return. On Sunday night, I got the text I'd been waiting for. The one that pushed everything over the edge. It was from one of the project leads on the Alaris account, someone I'd worked closely with for over 2 years. She asked, "Hey, are you still with us?" I heard something weird. I told her the truth. No. I left last week. She replied, shit, they told us you were on leave. Said you'd be back soon. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. That wasn't a miscommunication. That was a cover-up. They were trying to buy time. Elena called me less than 10 minutes later. I just got off a call, she said. They're scrambling. No replacement. No continuity. They tried to pass one of your juniors into the meeting. It tanked. We've decided. We're pulling the account. My stomach dropped. Not from fear. From something closer to awe. She was doing it. Not threatening. Doing a multi-million-dollar client? Gone. Because the person who held the trust wasn't the company. It was me. I want your proposal on my desk tomorrow, she said. And I want your name on the contract. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. You'll have it by noon. After we hung up, I sat at the table again. Same place I'd broken apart in, and this time, I didn't feel wrecked. I felt reborn. I wasn't climbing their ladder anymore. I was building my own floor. And as I watched the sun shift through the window, I let myself feel it. The power, the grief, the liberation, they never saw me. But now, they couldn't look away. The knot came on a Thursday, mid-morning, just after I'd finished sending over the final version of the proposal to Elena's team. I wasn't expecting anyone. At first, I thought it might have been a delivery, another office supply shipment, or maybe that chair I'd finally splurged on. But when I opened the door, it wasn't a package. It was him, David, my old manager, wearing a corporate branded jacket, holding his phone in one hand like it was a shield. He gave me a tight smile, the kind that doesn't touch the eyes, and said, "Mind if we talk?" I stepped back, but didn't say anything. He took it as permission, walking into my living room like he still had authority over the space. He looked around, eyes skimming the stacked binders, the open laptop, the whiteboard pinned with color-coded sticky notes. He wasn't used to seeing me in control. I watched him absorb it, how I'd built something quickly, confidently, without begging for approval. He sat on the edge of the armchair like a man who knew he'd already lost but hadn't figured out how to admit it yet. "I'm going to be straight with you," he said. "We're a little surprised by how things have escalated." I raised an eyebrow. Escalated? You leaving? The client fallout. There's a lot happening fast, and it's impacting people. Good, I said, not smiling. It should. He paused as if recalibrating. Look, I get it. You were frustrated. You wanted a raise. We should have handled that differently. But this reaction, it's short-sighted. You're burning bridges. I leaned against the wall, arms folded. No, David, I'm building something. There's a difference. He gave that laugh I'd heard too many times in meetings, forced, performative, the kind that filled silences when he didn't understand what was happening. You don't have the infrastructure for this. You think one loyal client makes you a business? No, I said calmly. But it's a start, one you'll never have again. The words hit the air like a slap, and I didn't soften them. I didn't know him comfort. I thought about all the years I'd swallowed frustration just to keep the peace. The meetings I sat through while he took credit for my work. The promotions he dangled like carrots I was never meant to reach. The one time I tried to advocate for myself, and he responded with a smirk. That smirk wasn't there now, just sweat gathering at his temples. They're talking legal, he said after a moment. You know that, right? You didn't give notice. You left in the middle of a meeting, and now we've got a former employee walking off with our client. You don't own trust, David. You don't own people. You think a non-compete keeps relationships locked in a cage? You think Alara stuck around because of your brand? They stayed because I made them feel safe, and you treated that like free labor. His mouth opened, closed. No rebuttal. Just the smallest flinch. I took a step forward. Not aggressive, just deliberate. You laughed in my face. You all did. When I asked for a raise, you made a joke of me. Now you're here, trying to guilt me into walking backward into a cage you built out of fear and entitlement. I'm not doing that. I'm not here to guilt you, he said quickly. I'm here to talk. That's it. Then let's talk, I said. Let's talk about how many times I cleaned up messes you made. Let's talk about the presentations I rewrote at 2 a.m. Let's talk about how you sent me into meetings unprepared just so I'd fumble and you could step in. Let's talk about how you built your entire career on the backs of people like me and never looked down long enough to see the cost. He sat there frozen. For once, silent. I stopped asking. I continued. That's what you never noticed. When someone like me stops asking for help, for credit, for fairness, it's not because they've accepted their place. It's because they're leaving it behind. He stood flustered now. We can still fix this. I'm not the enemy. You're not the enemy, I agreed. But you're a mirror, and I've seen enough. He hesitated at the door. You're going to realize this was a mistake. No, I said. I realized staying was. When the door clicked shut behind him, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just stood there, staring at the spot he'd occupied, and felt the weight of years evaporate off my shoulders. That conversation had lived in my throat for a long time, a half-formed, swallowed, rewritten in drafts I never dared speak aloud. And now it was out, not screamed, not dramatized, just spoken like truth should be. Later that afternoon, Elena texted contract signed, official as of noon. I stared at those words for a full minute before replying. A quiet joy bloomed in my chest, not loud or ecstatic, but full, like light pouring through a cracked ceiling you'd stopped believing in. This was mine. Built from pain, yes, but also from skill, from grace, from the steady, relentless resilience they never bothered to measure. They noticed when I left, not because they missed me, but because everything they'd ignored became impossible to cover once I was gone. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was the storm that followed silence. And now that I'd found my voice, I had no intention of quieting it again. The contract sat on my desk like a declaration. Signed, sealed, legal. Elena's signature right below mine, followed by the new company name. The one I'd printed in bold, simple lettering that somehow felt louder than shouting. I read it 3 times, not because I doubted it, but because some part of me couldn't believe it was real. After everything, the dismissals, the erasure, the years of unpaid overtime, and tight smiles, I had something no one could strip away. Ownership, autonomy. I didn't need a raise anymore. I wrote my own checks now. I poured coffee into a new mug. Not the chipped one from the office, but a clean slate purchased just for today. The kitchen smelled like morning and freedom. I moved slower now, not because I was tired, but because I wasn't rushing for anyone else's deadlines. For the first time in years, my schedule wasn't owned by people who underestimated me. I sat at the table and watched the sun crawl across the wall like it had all the time in the world. And I finally believed, so did I. Over the next few weeks, the inquiries rolled in quietly, like whispers passed between doors. Heard you're independent now, with love to chat. I've got a project we should talk about. What you did with Alaris. I need that. I didn't advertise. I didn't post on LinkedIn. I didn't have to. Word traveled, and it came with curiosity, with respect. I wasn't the invisible assistant anymore. I was the architect, the one who got things done without a parade, and people were starting to understand how rare that actually was. I hired a part-time assistant, someone smart, kind, grounded, someone who reminded me of me a few years back before I'd learned to swallow my own worth. I paid her well, gave her Fridays off without asking. When she asked why, I just said, because that's how it should have been for me. She didn't need more explanation than that, and I didn't need to defend my choices anymore. Every policy I made was a quiet rebellion against how things have been. Every invoice sent under my name was a page torn from the rulebook they once beat me with. Then came the email from HR. Not mine, theirs, the old firm. A bland, careful message asking if I'd be open to a conversation regarding transition logistics. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to transition. I wasn't theirs. They could chase shadows if they wanted to. I had no obligation to light their way. A week later, someone forwarded me a screenshot from a private Slack channel. Panic, confusion, 2 more clients walking. The company scrambling to reassign accounts they never learned to manage. No one said my name, but I saw it between every line. How did we not see her go? The truth was I'd been gone long before I left. I just hadn't moved my body yet. One night, I drove past the old building just to see it, just to test whether it still held power over me. The lights were still on in the corner suite. David's office. I parked across the street and watched it for a while. My engine ticking in the quiet. I wondered if he was still staying late, trying to fix a sinking ship with the same charm and arrogance that got him promoted in the first place. I wondered if Kelsey had started giving out bonuses to people who actually earned them, or if they were still handed out like favors at a party. I didn't feel anger anymore, just distance, like remembering a language I no longer spoke. Before I drove off, I looked down at my passenger seat. A manila folder sat there. Copies of my first 5 contracts signed and paid. Proof, not just of money, but of belief. These clients weren't with me because of paperwork. They were with me because I had shown up when it counted, because I didn't speak in jargon or hide behind strategy decks. I spoke plainly. I followed through. That had always been my edge. They just never noticed. Back home, I opened the drawer where I'd stuffed my old ID badge and company keycard. For months, I couldn't bring myself to throw them out. Part of me held on to them like war medals. But that night, I took them to the sink and ran water over them. Let the plastic warp. Let the logo fade. Then I tossed them into the trash with the calm finality of someone who no longer needed to prove anything to the people who had laughed in her face. I didn't become a different person. I didn't reinvent myself overnight. But I stopped shrinking. I stopped explaining. I stopped waiting for someone to invite me to a table I had built with my own hands. And when people asked how it happened, how I left, How I started? How I took a client that large without flinching? I just smiled and said, "They thought I was asking for a raise. I was asking to be seen. Never again will I lower my voice to be allowed in a room. Never again will I wait for permission to rise. I am not theirs. I never was."